This is the real action, the pot party. The trippers, the grasshoppers, the hip ones, all gathered and flying high as a kite.
Who is Tseli Khiba?
Oh, wow, you started with the hardest question. Tseli Khiba is a lawyer based and from Seru, Lesotho, within Southern Africa. I always make the distinction, not in South Africa, within Southern Africa. I'm also now a budding YouTuber as well. And then I guess I'm also a policy advisor on matters relating to the cannabis industry.
And so being a cannabis advocate, what has led you on this path?
A number of factors. During my second year of working in Lesotho, I had just moved back from doing my studies in Cape Town. We were fortunate enough to be approached by a client that wanted to approach the government at the time to apply for an operator's license. So I worked on that project for most of 2016. And then in 2017, luckily, we were among the first to be issued with such a license. So yay, that was a pretty big deal.
Awesome.
And then from then on in 2017, at the time, I was actually away doing my master's back at UCT. I think at that time, I really took the decision to come back to Lesotho and sort of pick up where I left off, because now, like, all eyes were on Africa, all eyes were on Lesotho. There was this big gold rush happening. And so I still wanted to, be a part of that. And that was basically how it started for me.
You're mainly on the medical advocacy side, just to clarify that.
I guess, I don't really like boxes. I support, cannabis reform and decriminalization and legalization broadly. So that's, medicinal, that's industrial. And I've also started to read up more and talk to more people about the recreational space, particularly other colleagues in Canada, because then it's a very interesting situation, because, you look at it and obviously the international treaties are against, the recreational market. But then when you look at, the space that countries have been able to carve out for themselves within the international landscape, based on human rights, based on like access rights as well, patient access. So I do also support the recreational market, but maybe within a more conservative space.
All right. So in your opinion, what is missing from the current cannabis legislation? What needs to be included so that all the stakeholders, that's from farmers to government to big corporations, what needs to be in there so that everyone's kind of partly satisfied?
In Lesotho? In the Lesotho?
Yeah, in Southern Africa in general.
So I think with something like this, it's a tricky subject, because you want to make it, ideally, the plan should be to make it an inclusive industry, so that the people, the business enterprises that want to go into the full-fledged corporate medicinal pharmaceutical side can do so. People that maybe want to do more, maybe smaller scale, whether it's dispensaries or, maybe selling traditional based medicines that are infused with cannabis are able to do so. But also in terms of just, you or I having a small plot in our gardens and using that, among ourselves within that space as well. So I think it's a very crucial issue, which policymakers are really grappling with. Hence, there have been so many delays, particularly in South Africa, with finalizing not just the cannabis bill, the one dealing with the privacy issues, but also there's still a lot of discussions about what about the commercial side of the industry. When is South Africa going to really get going there? So I think it's also because policymakers are taking into account all these different interests and trying to come up with the best balanced approach that can satisfy those relevant stakeholders.
So personally, I feel, just from like my research and watching what's happening in the world of cannabis, very much seems like a one-sided game where the people that have been doing the advocacy don't qualify because you're not in the medicinal side of things, or you don't have what it takes to create the product that we need, but they have the knowledge. So it's a bit of a weird one.
I completely appreciate that as well, because if we track my career, which I could say started in 2016, there are people that have been doing this for decades, right? And either they've been operating in the gray area, or they've really learned a lot, and they've also been really pushing for legalization and decriminalization. And then they find themselves in a situation where they're not able to really participate meaningfully in the cause which they've been advocating for. So it's also a question about, how do you include them in whichever model or strategy that is going to be pursued, right? Because even now with some other African countries, I think the last time I read up on Zambia and Rwanda, they were really pursuing models that were geared towards export. The similar model with Lesotho, with licensing certain individuals that are granted the licenses, subject to meeting the requirements,
right.
But that the models don't really set out, how are these cannabis products that are produced from within the country going to be used within the country? So that would have to include other aspects such as retail and, the prescriptions, what are the requirements that maybe doctors need to consider. So what I'm seeing is some of these models are geared towards export. So then that again pushes Africa into the production and cultivation line and not really, the value addition to the product to be used locally, and even to encourage trade between the different member states. So I'm hoping those are things that will still change, and that policymakers will consider how to change those provisions.
You attended the 63rd session for the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, where it was rumored that THC would be taken off the Schedule 1 and 4 list. How did this go?
So I did attend the 63rd session in March last year, but unfortunately at that time, the CND did not take a vote on, the scheduling of cannabis. There were still a lot of matters to be considered, and I understand that maybe a lot of member states did not feel that maybe they had all the information that they required to make the decision. But also, the World Health Organization's recommendation regarding the rescheduling of cannabis, I think that was also very important, because obviously that was based on a lot of scientific research and evidence, which, that is it's indisputable. So then that vote was postponed to December 2020. And then in December 2020, the CND member states did take the vote, and they did vote for cannabis to be removed from Schedule 4, which basically means that it's been recognized that it has medicinal value.
How does that affect the space we're in as far as the legalities go?
It's a big thumbs up, because a lot of groups, a lot of scientists, as well as doctors, have struggled a lot in the past to either gain access to funding or to get funding research proposals approved, because there was still that hurdle of, does cannabis have medicinal value or not, which it almost seems like an obvious thing, but this was really a sticking point. So when you get the thumbs up from that high level of the UNCND, which sets the global policies and laws relating to drugs and so on, it's a big thumbs up. But also for a lot of countries that maybe were conservative or still had a lot of views about whether or not cannabis does have medicinal value or not, getting sort of the nod from that body sort of gives you scope to maybe re-look at your own internal local laws, and maybe update them, since now we have all this new knowledge about cannabis.
So another popular opinion is that ending the war on drugs would actually be beneficial to the millions and millions of local people around the world who are basically risking their lives between production and the distribution of high demand and illegal narcotics such as cannabis. Do you agree or disagree, and why?
I agree wholeheartedly, again, because the whole basis of the war on drugs was based on a lot of propaganda, and also on a lot of misconceived ideas about the plant and its effects and so on. So I think, again, the war was misplaced to begin with. And I do think that taking a different approach would probably have better outcome, not only if you're looking to establish a cannabis industry, but also from a harm reduction point of view as well. Basically, a lot of countries have taken the approach to be hard on drugs, right? And unfortunately, that position has not always been successful, as we've seen. And luckily, what I've seen is in more recent years, there's been more of a trend towards harm reduction model, which involves maybe educating people about the various drugs, not just cannabis, but all the different ones, but also to also give those people the support that they need if they do find that they're in a situation where they've maybe become dependent on some of these substances, rather than just, sticking people in jail for being found with a couple of pounds of cannabis.
And the sad thing also is that a lot of people don't know that they are allowed to carry like a certain amount on them, and you still have cops arresting people just out of pure ignorance.
Mm-hmm. Which is really unfortunate. But I do know a lot of groups, particularly Fields of Green for All, been doing a lot of work with getting, people the right representation, and to also try and sensitize the police as well to these issues that, this is what the law says, these are the regulations. However, in a lot of cases, the police is maybe still operating as if, none of that progress has actually happened. But hopefully that is something that will change as, more awareness takes place. But also, again, unfortunately, not all countries have taken the approach that South Africa has. For example, in Lesotho, unless you have the operator's license, if you're in possession of cannabis, it's still a crime. It's still a criminal offense. So it hasn't been decriminalized everywhere. Okay. So we don't even have the leeway. That's really unfortunate. So we hope that situation will also change, because then you have these parallel systems, right? Where if I have a license and I could afford to have a license, I'm okay. But if for, whatever reasons, economic, social, I can't get access to a license, but I happen to have a small plot where I brew some medicines for myself and my family, particularly now with COVID, right, where we have been reading about cannabis's benefits, I could potentially be charged with a criminal offense. So there definitely has to be a more comprehensive reform of cannabis and how it's dealt with.
On what basis are these licenses granted? What is the process of obtaining one?
It's the provisions of our law in Lesotho. It is only for medicinal and scientific uses. Okay. So it has to fall into one of those two. And so again, that is based on the exceptions already provided for in the international treaties. The main act, the Drugs of Abuse Act, does set out what the requirements are to have a license, but it's maybe couched in broader terms that you need to not have a criminal record. You have to have adequate security around the area where you'll be growing the plant, and basically those details. And then you have regulations that are more maybe substantive about those details and those requirements that you have to meet. And then also the schedules have the relevant license fees depending on the category you're applying for. So you could be applying for a full license, which I believe last I checked was 500,000. There are other categories where you can apply for a cultivation license.
Right. What would you say your predictions are for the industry in the next 5 years, or at least what do you hope to see happen?
I think I'll speak just what I hope for the continent, right? We hope to see the industry becoming more inclusive. Okay. And that is because, I think, yes, there's the international framework that's set out and which a lot of countries have domesticated. However, I've also looked to other models. I think it was Jamaica, where you also have scope to create a model or a local law that works for your situation. So, for example, with the license fees, right, you could say, for example, allow farmers to pay for that fee over a period of time. There are options to maybe have corporations working with local farmers, which some of them have been doing this out of their own free will. However, maybe if it was maybe a legislated requirement that would maybe advance our cause more rapidly, or maybe just ensure that it does happen within the guidelines of the law. I also hope to see, the industry and cannabis becoming just maybe more normalized. So I think we are getting used to seeing, the various products, whether it's chocolate and tea and beverages. So I hope to see more of that and more local products, right, that are produced from in countries, whether, here in Lesotho or South Africa, we get tea from Kenya that's infused with cannabis, and just more exchanges happening along those lines. But I also hope to see this industry really being treated differently, because I think we have a long history with a lot of exploitation, whether it's diamonds, water, tobacco. We've been through a lot.
Everything. Anything and everything.
Exactly. So it would really be unfortunate if this happened again with this new industry, which I believe there's still time and space to shape the law and the policies in such a way that we could, derive more benefit from it. yeah, it's really just to see cannabis really making a difference on the continent. I think that's my overall vision.
So moving on to more exciting things. So you started Oane Solutions. It's a cannabis consulting business. Tell us a little bit more about what your goals and objectives are.
I started Oane a few months ago, and it was really, my move to maybe making the work that I was already doing more formal, because I was already providing services and so on. However, I wanted maybe to have it in a more structured manner. Nice. So I want to continue giving legal advice to, individuals and companies and organizations and countries as well that are engaging in the industry. Then with my YouTube channel, I really want to promote the African continent for cannabis investment, but also I wanted to create a platform where we as Africans can really shape the narrative and speak out from our perspective and talk about what it is that we see and what we want for the industry and how we want to see it develop. So I think it's also giving a voice to that. And also just to continue supporting advocacy programs, from patient access to creating transparent supply chains. So so I have a few goals. The industry has taken off in such an amazing but very quick way. I think it's very important to try and get ahead of that and try and guide where you would like to see things go.
Right. Tseli, thank you so much. Hope you guys learned as much as I did. See you on the next one. Cheers.